start. Okay, the recording is in progress. That's great. And it looks like we have some participants coming in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar with Unibuddy and Capstone Vietnam. We're super excited that you are here. We're going to just hang out for maybe like a minute or so just to give people time to join, but then we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to shut off notifications from my phone. So we don't get interrupted. How are you both doing today so far?
So far, so good.
So far, so
yeah,
good.
very good.
Excellent.
I get in there.
That's all anybody can ask these days, right? Awesome. All right. Hello to everybody who's joining. We've got a good number of participants coming in. Thank you all so much for being here. We're super excited to be sharing this presentation with you about winning the trust of students and parents through good communication. We're going to get started in just a minute or two here, but thank you all for being here and thanks for hanging out with us. Alrighty. Wow. The number of participants coming in has slowed down a little bit. So in order to make good use of our time, we might as well just go ahead and get started. I will go on to the next slide here and just briefly introduce myself before turning it over to my lovely co-presenters here. My name is Paige and I'm a customer success manager on the Unibuddy side of things, which basically means that I get to help all of our fantastic partners utilize our software. We'll talk a little bit more about Unibuddy and what we do towards the end of the presentation here, but just a little bit of background about who I am as a person as well. I worked in higher education before coming to Unibuddy. I worked as both a recruiter and a student ambassador manager. I have a really deep passion for higher education as a kind of space, and so I'm really excited to be here talking with Capstone Vietnam today. I also was an international student, so I may be putting that hat on occasionally during the presentation, but just super excited. I will turn the mic over to Mark and you can introduce yourself and we'll go down the line from there.
Okay, thank you very much, Paige. My name is Mark Ashwill. I'm Managing Director and co-founder of Capstone Vietnam. I was smiling at my photo because I have not worn a suit and tie since the pre-COVID-19 era, quite some time ago. So I've been living and working in Vietnam for 16 years this fall. I arrived in 2005 as country director of IIE, Institute of International Education, Vietnam. Before that, I was at SUNY Buffalo, wearing a variety of hats. So I jumped from the public to the nonprofit to the private sector in a span of about 4 years. I love what I'm doing. But thank you for having us.
My pleasure.
I guess it's a short introduction about myself. So hi everyone, my name is Ngoc-Anh and I am the Deputy Director of Operations at Capstone Vietnam. And before going to I also work as the advisor. So I worked directly with students and support them to go and study overseas. And before that, just like Paige, I also I was an international student, and I hope that today I can share my experience as the international students. I can give some insights as well as from the role of an advisor. And I'm really looking forward to start our webinar.
Awesome. Okay, well, you both know that I'm going to be driving the slides, so please just let me know when you want me to go to the next one, but I will let y'all take it away from here. Well, if it will go, let's see. Come on, there we go. All right.
There it is, slowly but surely. Okay. We're talking about winning the trust of parents and students, the power of communication. Obviously, the focus is on Vietnam, but some of what, perhaps a lot of what we'll say is applicable to other countries, with the exception of platforms and social media channels and chat apps. So I wanted to start off with photos, one from Ho Chi Minh City taken last week, and another one that I took over the weekend. This is actually mid-afternoon. So if you've been to Vietnam, to Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, you'll know that these are very unusual photos because Ho Chi Minh City is a city of about 9 million people. That's the official population. Hanoi has about 5 million people. And they're like ghost towns now because they are under lockdown. We're currently in the fourth wave of COVID-19, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So as of today, we have 202,000 active cases. Something to keep in mind, you've probably seen some media coverage of what's happening here. 94% of all the cases are in Ho Chi Minh City. There are reasons for that, but they transcend the scope of this webinar. If you're interested, drop me a line. I'll probably be writing something about that. Hanoi is in lockdown, as I mentioned, but it's mainly as precaution. There are fewer than 3,000, about 3,000 cases. About 4,000 cases in Da Nang in central Vietnam, also under lockdown, but mainly as precaution. A lockdown means that you're only supposed to go out for essentials in your neighborhood, more or less, or elsewhere with special permission. Okay, next slide.
Okay. Do you see the context slide, or should I go to the next one? Sorry, I think Google is, okay, next slide.
All right, let me just move this over 1 second.
Sometimes Google Slides really just like throws me for a loop, so.
So back to the second slide.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Okay. So I want to provide you with some context. I think that's very important. Vietnam was an international success story and role model last year from day one, January 20th, I believe, 2020, first 2 cases, to April 2021. During that time, there were 3 relatively minor waves of COVID-19. I remember in April, 2 days after our fairs, that's when it started in the South in particular. So Ho Chi Minh City and neighboring provinces. In April, there were fewer than 300 active cases nationwide. This is in a population of 100 million people. And 35 deaths, as I recall, very few deaths up to that point. Vietnam had successfully contained COVID-19 with contact tracing, quarantine, a good quarantine system, and it worked. But in the meantime, it was negotiating deals for the all-important vaccine, and they were in short supply with the different types of vaccine as of April. That is when the Delta variant reared its ugly head in Ho Chi Minh City in particular. I think you all know how highly contagious that is, and that explains the spread. So that's the epicenter of COVID-19 right now. Vietnam's economy grew at a rate of 2.9% last year. It was the only economy with a growth rate in Asia Pacific. Some economies had negative growth. The World Bank predicted 6.8% this year. That was before the 4th wave, so-called, which began in April. It's actually going to be, they actually lowered it today to 4.8%. That assumes that this mass vaccination program, which is being rolled out, does what it's supposed to do, and Vietnam can get back to business. The good news is that there's still a lot of interest in overseas study. We're actually seeing more going overseas now than last year. That's because many of the host countries have successfully dealt with COVID-19 through mass vaccination programs. The wealthy countries that have the resources to purchase enormous supplies of different vaccines. So the last point is parents are, as Ngoc-Anh will mention, parents and students, maybe to a lesser extent, are worried, they're concerned. So it's more important than ever to show them the love through timely responses to emails, to messages on various chat apps, and to show them that you care. But as I said, there are more students going abroad this year. I've joked with some colleagues that the free vaccination is actually like a temporary incentive. In fact, we had one kid arrive at the boarding school on the East Coast, and he is going to get his vaccination today or tomorrow. So yeah, his parents are very happy. Next slide.
Yes, for this session, I'm glad to talk about the concerns and the reactions from the institution side and also from students and parents. Luckily, because we worked with, like we are the intermediary, and we have the opportunities to work with many institutions, and we have received many direct questions as well as like indirect questions. They show their concerns. For example, like maybe like when they will be travel again, when they will be able to travel to Vietnam again and have like face-to-face communications with students and parents, or like because right now they are unable to travel, so how can they keep in touch with parents and students? Because especially for representatives here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I've seen that many of you feels like emails is not really an effective way to communicate with maybe not only Vietnamese students and parents, but like some other countries as well. So yeah, the question is how to like keep in touch with them and maintain the communication. And also from the side of students and parents, they have so many concerns, just like Mark just mentioned. So they worried about the informations, they are lack of information. Also like, because the representatives, they cannot travel here to provide them direct information. And also like many institutions, you only have the brochures in English, when like in our country, not so many parents, they read English. Or like the visa thing. For example, maybe a month ago, as I remembered, the embassy in Ho Chi Minh City and also in Hanoi, they kind of closed for the normal interviews, and they only process the urgent situations. So and for now, during the lockdown, it's very difficult for students and parents in like cities other than Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City to get visa. And also with them traveling, it's not only that the parents and students, they are concerned about the long flights, and like students have to transit in like several destinations before reaching the like final destinations, but also like what are the paperwork they have to do. Like they need to have them test the PCR test, which valids for 3 days before they enter. But like maybe just if there's some issues with their flight, if it's delayed, then what will happen? So many questions we have received from parents and students. And also like what are the supports from students, from institutions, how their kids will be helped during this time. So please feel free to maybe comment in the chat box if you have other concerns or you have other questions from students and parents, because for the next slides, Mark and I will provide maybe some more good news.
Okay.
Uh-oh, seems like we may have lost Mark there for a second. We'll be back though, I'm sure.
Yes. So yes, during this time, we have faced a lot of difficulties.
It happens, right? Jeez.
Yes.
Internet sometimes just doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, but really, like now we really have to keep like positive.
Exactly. That's all you can do. Mark, are you
Okay.
back with us? All right, awesome. There he is. All right, we lost you right at the beginning of the slide, so you can just start wherever you're going to start.
Okay, everybody's still there. I just wanted to make the point, I mentioned isolation from the global community earlier. So I have to be quite honest and say that we miss you guys, because we were used to having a steady stream of colleagues visit us in both offices in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. And our last public event, it was a coffee talk, very successful happened for a day school with a boarding component in the US. That was in January 2020. And in March of 2020, the government stopped issuing visas to foreigners. The only foreigners entering Vietnam were diplomats, people with special permission from companies. Okay, so making lemonade out of lemons, the lemons being the isolation, the impact of COVID-19 worldwide. But tell your story in a compelling and convincing manner. This refers to digital marketing, also digital events, because obviously that's one of the only ways you can reach out to parents and students. In addition to your network, we'll talk about that as well. One size, Ngoc-Anh, feel free to interrupt me, because she was going to provide some examples for some of these. So I don't want to go through them too quickly.
Okay, so I think you can go ahead, and if I have anything else to add, then I will just jump in.
Okay, all right, so one size doesn't fit all. That refers to your target audiences, because you should have two different messages, similar but different. One target audience being parents, the other being students. The medium of communication, this is something I've talked about for years. Some institutions have yet to get with the program, so to speak, but as I mentioned, the reality is that very few parents read English. Therefore, it's Vietnam, the materials have to be in Vietnamese. That also makes it better for their sons and daughters to quickly understand the material. Tap into your network to brand and promote your institution. So in addition to digital marketing, maybe you certainly have an alumni network and currently enrolled students, also parents, maybe more for boarding, maybe more for secondary than higher education institutions. But now more than ever, we need a team effort to.
I think we lost him
I
again.
think we might have.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Oh, he's back.
It's strange. Usually Zoom's pretty stable. I haven't seen this before, but okay.
Yeah, I was about to provide one example for this point when you are freeze for a few seconds. So we worked with one of our partners, and I remember one day I received the e-newsletters from that school, or a separate email from that school sent to us, but that is like a letter from one of their parents from Vietnam, and he wrote like a long letter to express how he felt for the schools and like sharing from his own experience, and also kind of like from that he didn't really like directly encourage, like tell people like please go to this school to study, but then from the letter we can really feel his love and his trust on the staff and faculty of the school. So once we received that information, our marketing team directly like translate those informations into Vietnamese, because actually the original letter was in English. We have it, and then we shared on our social network sites, on our social medias like Facebook, other forums. And that post received a lot of views and also reactions from the audiences in Vietnam. So I think that is like one way. We don't really have to be here, but we can use different tools to communicate the message to our potential students and parents.
Could you talk a little bit about parent and student perceptions, how they differ, what parents are most concerned about versus what students are most concerned about?
Yeah, so from also like another experience of mine, because we also supported a lot of institutions with the marketing activities in like to promote for their presence in Vietnam. And yeah, so we normally encourage them to have 2 articles, one for students and one for parents, even though like maybe the content, you will see some similarity in the contents, but like the way we present the informations and also like for some part of the article, students, for example, students, they are interested in not only the quality of the program, but also what are the activities or the settings and the location of the institutions, what they can do outside of their classroom. However, from the side of parents, especially during this time, they will care more about the safety. And like traditionally, they always like refer to the ranking of the schools and how good is the program. So we think that by like placing the right information right at the start, it will be a very powerful way to catch their attention. And like
just if I could say something
article.
too, I think that's very true internationally from students and parents, right? That's something that we see on the Unibuddy side of things as well, that it's just parents are regularly concerned about safety, about rankings, and about essentially whether or not their student's going to be able to find a home at the institution that they go to. The students themselves, a little less concerned with some of those features, right? Like they want to know what's it like on a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. in the residence halls. What's that going to be like for me? Whereas the parents, overwhelmingly, it's amazing to see even internationally that's the case. They just want their children to be safe, which makes a lot of sense at the end of the day.
And Vietnamese students are also interested in the post-graduation employment opportunities. I know we're speaking to colleagues from different countries, so that obviously differs from country to country, Canada, US, Ireland, etc. But that's something they think about. What can I do after I graduate? Even if it's, in the case of the US, a short-term work opportunity through optional practical training.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll ask Ngoc-Anh also to talk about this a little bit. Be flexible in your use of market-specific social media channel apps. So in the case of Vietnam, you have a super app called Zolo, which hopefully you, if not all of you, are familiar with. And that's used more by parents than students. And then for students, Facebook is still, it's a number 3 website and one of the most popular chat apps, but there are others. And this is something for you to think about when you create marketing materials. Just to quickly circle back to the first point, our staff work very hard on creating quality materials because you can't just throw something up on a high traffic media outlet and expect people to read it. You need, I hate to use the word clickbait, but you need a compelling title to get them to look at it in the first place. Good content, photos, a couple of links, etc., to generate some excitement, and then you promote that elsewhere. So I'll stop here and let Ngoc-Anh talk about TikTok.
Yes, also, so in Vietnam, it's, as we mentioned earlier, there are kind of like 2 large group of audiences, like the parents and the students. And from the side of the parents, apart from the general applications or social network like Facebook, especially in Vietnam, definitely we should think of Zalo. in order to reach out to them. So Zalo is kind of like maybe a similar, have some similar functions, but more user-friendly to adults. It's like Facebook, but like a more, maybe a simpler version. And people can like chat, and they also can share their moments and share their feelings. So it's very convenient for students and parents if the institutions can know this, and they can like reach out and have some good communications via Zalo. So yeah, so like maybe instead of using email, we can have informations through those channels. Also, like apart from Zalo, for adults in Vietnam, TikTok or Instagram or Facebook are like the most popular apps in Vietnam. And I think it has changed quickly as well. Maybe at the beginning of 2020, when I mentioned like TikTok, people will agree with me that it's so popular, but then it's more of like to have fun rather than having something academic or something formal there. But over a year or less than a year, TikTok has changed their trend, and it's more towards the education content. So I think right now it's still like we still have enough time to have our presence on those new platforms. Because yeah, like Facebook, yes, we know that it's still like the #1 app for youngsters. However, yeah, it's popular, so everyone will have the presence there. So we can, it would be better if we can present ourselves in different forms.
I totally agree with that too. And that's something that I think a lot of institutions struggle with initially, is that idea of when do we move into these new medias. And I work for a tech company, so I'm always going to advocate for that kind of pushing the envelope. But there comes a point where you kind of have to tip the thing over and say, we've got to try this, because if we don't, we're not meeting the students where they are. And that's the most important thing at the end of the day, because they're not necessarily going to look on those traditional spaces. They might come to your website, but they're definitely on TikTok. So if you have that kind of understanding and you have the ability to move your institution in that way, it can be really helpful to do it earlier rather than later.
And it's also very important to consider like for each market. So maybe the market in Vietnam will be totally different from like or Korean markets. I've seen like, for example, in Vietnam, we have the super app, which is Zalo, but maybe in China, you will have WeChat, or in Korea, we will have Kakao Talk. So yeah, it's very important to identify like what are the popular platforms.
Yeah. So true. So true.
If you've been to Vietnam and have any phone numbers in your phone, I guarantee you download Zalo, that their accounts will pop up for sure. This
is an app. I have never been to Vietnam, so I've never heard of it. I think that's so cool. It's good for me to know too, like that, there are just so many different ways to reach students and things like that. So I'm learning something, which is always good. Love it.
Actually, just yesterday, we had one student who is 15 years old, and it was his first alone flight to the United States.
No way.
Yeah, and especially during this time, you can imagine how worried his parents. But then we also use the apps to connect them. So we have the school representative himself and our advisors in like one chat box, and then he would just like communicate with all of us and saying like where he is now, what is the next steps, and also our advisors will keep in touch with that and like guiding him, like for example, oh, please go to this area to take your baggage, and then please go to this gate, something like that. So it's a smooth travel.
Awesome. Yeah, because that would be so intimidating. I remember when I was 15, I would have just been clueless. So how great to be able to kind of like bring your people with you in a way. That's awesome. I love it.
Yes, and also from the institution side, they also were able to update us that, hey, I got this kit and
Yeah.
we are traveling to the dormitory. So that's wonderful.
Awesome. And that goes back to what we were talking about with parents, right? Like if they're able to know that their child is safe and is where they are supposed to be, they're going to feel so much more confident sending them to another country at the end of the day. So, wow, I love that. That's such a good story.
Yeah, that their child is being taken care of.
Yeah.
And by the host institution through these different technologies.
I love it.
So as a quick aside, this kit is actually an example of how labor intensive our work, all of our work has become because of COVID-19, just everything, providing feedback, advice, how to get the test, and then the flights and everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's so many more layers of information that has to be communicated. And we talk about this a lot too on the institution side with Unibuddy. The other side of that is that information changes so regularly too, that you have to be able to have a way to quickly update your international students on the shift in the vaccine requirements or how long you have to quarantine for, or if you have to quarantine at all. Like there are so many moving pieces when it comes to the way we need to communicate right now. It's
moving targets. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the last point on the slide is local and host institution follow-up. For example, through digital marketing, when you identify a contact, somebody fills out a form, they read the article, they saw an ad. So that shows us that they're at least casually interested, and maybe more. Then we need to follow up. And the follow-up in country is all important, often the deal maker versus a colleague sitting in his office in whatever country, even communicating via chat app, not to mention email, which is less popular among young people. And then the connection between the person here and advisor here and the colleague in country X.
Absolutely. All right, we ready for the next slide? Yep. Okay. Oh, in theory, there she goes. Oh. There we go. So now you get to listen to my voice for a little bit, which is just from the Unibuddy side of things and the way that our software can help with these challenges that we've talked about, and the way that you can leverage an ambassador program at an institution to really help the students make these decisions and be able to feel confident in the ways that they are moving across the world at this point. Then at the end, we do have time for question and answer. I have a few prepared for my lovely panelist friends here, but if the attendees would like to put some in the chat, we would be very happy to answer those for you as well. So please feel free to type away. But just to kind of summarize all of the things that we've been talking about for the key challenges for marketing and recruitment teams at universities at this point. COVID-19 has absolutely made sharing the kind of like special sauce, the magic of your institution, a little bit more difficult, because I know from when I worked in higher ed, we would always talk about when you can get a student on campus, when you can get them talking to a current student, those are the moments that are going to help them decide. I know from when I chose my own university, really like being on campus, feeling the magic was what made me decide that I wanted to go there at the end of the day. So as higher education institutions, we have to really make this type of shift and be able to push this magic online or into a digital space. And so essentially, really what we know institutions are trying to do is attract prospects who are really a good fit for their institution, who are going to come there, feel like they've found home, feel like that this is their place. And the way to do that is to allow them to make connections before they get to campus. And we also know that universities are facing limited resources. That is not a space that escaped from the kind of economic impact of the virus of COVID-19. And so we recognize that that is a space that is important to acknowledge as well. In terms of the ways that relationships have shifted with Gen Z and with the way that they prefer to communicate, I think a lot of universities kind of live really comfortably in this yesterday column where they're communicating via traditional channels like email, like, individual communications in that sense. They're talking about themselves in a university-centric way. They're saying like, this is what we are, da da da, like all of that good stuff. They're used to offline learning, so lecture halls and things like that. And they really have enrollment as their main goal. And then when we look at the today column, I think this is the space where Gen Z lives more comfortably, right? Their communication is constant. It is pretty much always on 24/7. They are a digital first generation as well. So they are the ones who are going to the apps like we mentioned earlier. And it's something that is really important to remember when you think about how you're communicating with these students. They also are a very student-centric generation. They have the internet at their fingertips, so they can find out all of those rankings, all of those kind of classes, things that universities used to be kind of shouting about to students to make them listen. Students know that, right? And so what they really want is that individual connection with current students at your institution. I have a colleague who always used to talk about the fact that when you want to go to like a restaurant in a new city, what's the first thing that you do? You open Yelp or you open Grubhub and you find, the highest rated restaurant in the type of kind of cuisine that you were looking for, right? And students do that too. They want to hear reviews from real people and they want to talk to individuals who have like quote unquote ate at that restaurant before. And so that's something that's really important to remember. You have to get your student ambassadors up front in your marketing, up front in those apps, up front in places like Unibuddy that will allow them to really communicate with those prospects first things first. And then of course, there's the move towards online and hybrid learning. That's a consequence of COVID-19, but it's something that I think is really important for this last point here too, right? Widening participation and really diversifying the schools that up until this point maybe couldn't reach out to the students that they're able to market to now who are really good fits for that institution. So all of those things are the shift that Gen Z I think is really allowing higher education to make as a kind of space, which I think is really exciting. And then in terms of the evolving landscape itself, we've got these fun stats here that 58% of prospective students are influenced in their decision by the ability to connect with current students. That's more than half of those students that you are prospecting. They want to be able to talk to current students. In fact, one would say that they need to. They need to know those experiences that they had. They need to know what it was like for them to come across oceans, across states, whatever it is that they are doing. And then, of course, there's changes in student expectations. 36% claim high importance on speaking to universities outside of normal working hours. And that's kind of an intimidating statistic, at least from my perspective as someone who used to work in admissions. I'm like, oh boy, so they were going to message me at 3 a.m. and expect that I respond. Well, the truth of the matter is, given the stat above that one right there, they probably want to talk to your students outside of those working hours, right? So that's the plus of having student ambassadors. A lot of times they are more willing to participate in late evening events. They're more willing to reach out to students at different times than maybe your career staff members would be. And I mean, I think we are not post-pandemic quite yet, but once we do that, I realized that 49% of those international students would feel less worried about studying abroad if they could ask questions to other international students. And I think that's something that will absolutely persist as we kind of continue with the developments of how things are going. It's something that's really important to know. What was your experience like? I mean, the story that you referenced earlier is a really good one to kind of say like, okay, you had support when you went to this institution. You felt like your family was with you, and that's like a really fantastic thing to think about. And then in terms of actually leveraging a digital ambassador program, I think the first thing that really is helpful about this is that it promotes awareness, right? So going back to what my lovely fellow panelists were saying, this promotes your university brand. It allows student life to be talked about by the people who actually know it best. It's super authentic in this second point right here, because students speak the way students speak. And I think that's a great thing at the end of the day. And then it also makes your students more accessible. It allows you to spread the word farther than you would if it was just a kind of in-person event, and allows you to recruit students from all over the world, which is fantastic. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And we have some questions for my lovely fellow panelists here. But if anybody has anything that they would like to throw into the chat, please feel free to do so. We're very happy to answer those as well. But I will go ahead and ask the first question if y'all are cool with that. Does that sound good? Awesome. Okay, so studying abroad can bring up a lot of questions and concerns from parents and guardians. How do you think that universities can address these questions early on in the process to really kind of help with those concerns?
Fine. Would you like to begin? Ladies first.
Let me repeat the question one more time, please.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So it's just kind of a general question about how studying abroad can really bring up these questions and concerns for parents and guardians, and kind of how do you think universities can get ahead of that a little bit and kind of make it a little bit clearer earlier in the process, why maybe some of those concerns are not as necessary?
I think, like, first of all, we always should like be updated with the market that we are going to recruit. So yeah, from like normally like what we usually do for our clients, which are our institution, like the partners, we also update them with the markets in Vietnam. And I'm sure that Mark also very happy to share like some of his like updates information, his writings about the situation. So yes, keep an eye on the markets and aware of what they are looking for, and so that you can prepare in advance. And also like I think from the institution side, they will have a lot of things to share with the students. But one of the effective way is if they can receive the questions directly from students. So let's get back to the point, like how we can get those information. Would you think that the students would feel like comfortable, like exchanging questions to them, or they will feel more comfortable having like a third party, like through some agents in Vietnam or like in that country, or like through a student, for example, to like get those, maybe like to deliver those questions to them, and maybe wait for the third party to like gather the information for them. So yes, I think it will be, yes, keep an eye on the updates of the information, but can be like in different forms through your agent, through the students, and through different platforms of yours.
That's an excellent point. I think the more familiar they are with the markets that they're working with, the better they can anticipate student and parent concerns. We've talked about personal safety, which is key. Last year, it was COVID-19. It was also anti-Asian racism, violence in some countries. That's on people's minds. These are issues that are being discussed in parent Facebook groups and student Facebook groups for different countries. So just to, introduce the elephant in the room and talk about it and reassure them.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I always think about as well is having a really strong internal communication system within the university's office itself, so that you always kind of know, like we were mentioning, what the line is, what the current vaccine requirements are, what the quarantine plan is. And I know that that can be a really difficult thing to keep everybody on the same page about because things shift so regularly, but figuring out a way to make that type of internal communication really clear and really strong, so when there are changes, everybody who's communicating knows that, right? I think that's something that is super, super important for universities to really take in mind when they are thinking about, the ways that they're talking about these concerns, because you never know, and it's good to be able to be on the same page at least. Great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about social media, because we chatted about all of the fun apps that students are using a little bit earlier, but what have either of you seen kind of fun ways that universities are utilizing social media in order to reach parents and guardians and other people who might influence the student decision making process? Have you seen any examples of that you can kind of fill us in about?
Well, we've seen a range of videos, some professionally made, others semi-professional, and others amateur. So, and we give partners, clients honest feedback if they send us a video, for example, for a digital marketing campaign. We tell them what, if we can convene student focus groups for that matter, and tell them what works and what doesn't work. The issue with a lot of institutions is that they don't have, it's a staffing issue. They don't have the staff, or it's a very slow process, maybe more public than private institutions, because they're dealing with a different department. And there's also the bureaucratic process involved. They need sign-offs on the use of different university materials, whatnot. So they are constrained in that respect. Of course, if they have the budget, they can outsource that. You want to add anything to that, Ngoc-Anh?
Actually, I totally agree with you, and have nothing else to add to that excellent answer.
Love it. I love it. All right. So in a kind of tangential question to that one, do you think that it can become counterproductive to spend a lot of energy and money on convincing parents and guardians instead of the students themselves? And as a follow-up question, in what instances do you think it is counterproductive, if any at all?
For me, so from my perspective, it's it would be like they should be for both sides. It's not only the students, even though I agree that especially in recent years in developing countries like Vietnam, for example, the students, they have more controlling power, or like they have their voice in terms of like what to study or like where to study at. However, the main point is the one who make their dreams happen are the parents. Those are the ones who like sponsor for their study. So they, in a way, they still have like a strong power. And so I think it should be, in terms of like we choose to focus on which group, we should have the message to a large group of people. And yes, like maybe several years ago, I would say like, yes, maybe go to the group of parents because they will have more power. But then now we also should think of the students, because they have their own voice as well.
And that's because students are better and more empowered than ever. So the students still need to make a strong case to their parents. But we touched on this point earlier, the need to tailor your message accordingly and customize your outreach to each target audience, parents, students.
Yeah, it's so true. It's a double-edged sword at the end of the day because students have so much more information. They're making the decisions themselves, but you can't leave the parents out of it because, like Ngoc-Anh said, it's like, this is true at the end of the day. Like, they still are the folks who you have to convince, even if the student is like absolutely in love with the university, right? So that's
Well,
an excellent point. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how can universities address concern of cost for international students, and could they be more transparent a little bit earlier on in the process? And also just want to put in a plug for any of our attendees. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. I'm very happy to ask those instead of the ones we have prepared. So we've got like 9 minutes left. I don't want to leave you all out of this. So if you'd like to chat, please do it. But in terms of cost, do you think that's something that universities should be more transparent about, and how can they do that earlier on in the
process? With Capstone, we have a pretty unique approach when we work with students and parents. So our process is always we have an open conversation with both the students and the parents, because in some cases they will have different interests or they will have different answers to our questions. So we will have conversations with them and to figure out what's their academic background, what are the criteria for them when they look for an institution overseas, and also very important, how much they can afford for their studying. So from information, our advisors at Capstone Vietnam will build a list of institutions that fit the student the most. And the decision making will be on the side of the parents and students, and we will continue supporting them in the next process. So yes, we believe that it's very important to also like to let the student think about it, and we also like guide them and provide them with their the information that they need. So it should be clear right at them before they actually start the application process, because at the end it's also no use if the institution is great for the kid but then they are not able to afford for their studying.
That's such a good point.
As many of you probably know, Vietnam is very much a scholarship market. Everybody wants a scholarship. Financial aid, that's another issue. A lot of institutions, especially the more selective ones, offer financial aid. But one of the issues is that everyone wants a scholarship. People of means sometimes consider they're happy to take financial aid for their children, to the cost. So you need to do due diligence to make sure that unqualified students do not receive precious financial aid dollars, whatever the currency is. Let's talk about the old-fashioned website for a moment. There are some institutions that present information in a much better format than others, easier to find, easier to follow. And so I think that's key. And also to hammer away at this point in your digital marketing, because this is a scholarship market. I think that covers it.
Definitely. I think the website is a really good point as well. We've talked a lot about social media channels and other ways to communicate with people, but it is such an important thing to remember that your website is there to be a repository of information for students. And that type of information is definitely something that should be easily accessible and should be, right up front so that it's understood from the jump, basically. So I love that. It's true. There's some traditional things that we can't forget about, right?
And just one more point. What percentage of international students receive both, and what's the average award? That's very important, because in Vietnam, if I may use US dollars as the currency, the sweet spot, so-called sweet spot, is really in the for higher education institutions, is in the say $25,000 to $35,000 range. So that helps them figure out what's feasible.
Yeah, what's realistic. I think that's very important. Absolutely. Great. Okay, I have one last question for you all, and then if you would like to ask me some questions, I'm happy to field some as well too. But let's chat a little bit about when students study abroad, they can gain, access to a wider range of majors and programs to choose from. And this can sometimes cause a little bit of like a freedom of choice dilemma, where it's like, what do I choose? How do I pick a major? How do I pick a program? And so do you have any kind of thoughts about ways that universities could communicate that better to students, or help them better understand that variety, so they're not feeling as kind of spoiled by choice when it comes to that decision?
So in Vietnam, and also I think like maybe other Asian countries as well, the students' decision are hugely affected by their parents, because let's say like in Vietnam, we don't really have like a career counselor at schools during like secondary level. So by the end of their 12th grade, they don't really know what other options out there. And let's say like business is still like the most popular program that maybe international students choose. But to be honest, I also was in like the process of like talking to students and parents, and I was surprised that when I asked them like, what's the program you're looking for? They say like, yes, business or engineering, computer science, something like that. But then if we just add one more question, like to reconfirm their knowledge and their understanding, then it's like completely zero, because it's like the idea from someone else, not them. I think it's important to reconfirm and like to let them know what it is about, what they like, maybe some possible courses they are going to take at the universities, and like the possibilities of the careers they are able to choose after they finish that program. So it can be like a longer conversation. But if we can, and I think also, if sometimes like students, they will not ask directly that what this program is about. But if we can like provide those information to them in advance, then it can be like one of our advantages. And yes, and also I've seen that many students, they also referred to their friends or like someone who have already studied abroad, and to get to know more about like some possibilities out there.
Yeah, I think that's actually like such a beautiful thing to kind of end this on, because it goes back to what we were talking about when it comes to listening to your students, meeting them where they are, and introducing them to resources that will allow them to feel empowered to make those types of decisions on their own. And a lot of the times that's going to be current or recent alumni students who can say to them like, hey, I thought maybe I wanted to major in business, but actually communication was the right thing for me to major in, or those types of things, right? And so given that we have about a minute left, I feel like it might be best to wrap this up, unless Mark, you have something else you'd like to say. I don't want to fully piss you off.
I just have one quick point. A few years ago, I wrote an article for Forbes Vietnam. So it was in Vietnamese, but still, obviously, not enough people have read it, parents and students, because Vietnamese undergraduates are primarily studying business, or they're the highest percentage studying business. Why? Because they think you have to study business to do business. So there's a lack of knowledge about other majors and also the value of a liberal arts education. And that's a process that has to take place here in Vietnam, or in the sending country, and in the host country at the host institution, using the website in the US context as big future by College Board. Because we've had students, I had one student say to me, I want to major in social sciences. Wow. So we had to work with her. What in particular, and then what can you do with what courses will you take, and what can you do with this major? Do you have to pursue graduate study, or can you enter the world of work, etc.?
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being here today. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, but thank you to all the attendees out there as well. It was lovely to have you, and we hope you learned something. Bye, everybody.
Thanks very much. Good night from Hamilton. Bye.